Get on your knees now. The command cut through the quiet like a blade, sharp and final, echoing across the small suburban street as red and blue lights painted Naomi Carter's modest one-story home in restless flashes. The porch lights still glowed a soft amber, warm against the cold authority gathering outside, where nearly 30 officers stood in formation, their silhouettes rigid, their presence overwhelming, turning a peaceful block into something unrecognizable. Naomi stood just inside her front door, barefoot on hardwood floors that still held the faint warmth of the evening, her hand resting lightly against the frame as if grounding herself in something real, while everything beyond it felt staged, exaggerated, wrong. She had been making tea less than 2 minutes ago, the kettle still whispering on the stove behind her, steam curling upward in thin, patient threads, unaware that the world outside had shifted without warning. From the living room window, she could see them, rows of uniforms, vehicles lined up wheel to wheel, neighbors' curtains pulled just enough to watch without being seen, phones lifted quietly, recording without understanding. A voice crackled again through the loudspeaker, colder this time, more certain. Step outside with your hands visible. Naomi didn't move right away, not because she didn't hear it, but because she understood something they didn't. That urgency, that tension, didn't belong here. Her breathing remained steady, measured, like someone trained not to react to noise but to meaning. The hardwood beneath her feet creaked softly as she shifted her weight, a small, human sound in contrast to the mechanical rhythm of engines idling and radios murmuring outside. She reached for the door handle, not hurried, not hesitant, just deliberate, and pulled it open fully, revealing herself to the flood of lights. For a moment, everything paused, not the officers, not the scene, but something invisible between perception and truth. Naomi stepped onto the porch, her thin gray sweater catching the night air, her posture straight, her gaze level, meeting the line of authority without flinching. Officer Daniel Reeves stood at the front, his stance firm, his jaw set with the kind of certainty that comes from orders, not understanding. His eyes scanned her quickly, cataloging, reducing, deciding. To him, she was a subject, a situation, a name attached to a directive. To her, he was something else entirely, a man standing inside a mistake he hadn't yet realized he was making. The distance between them was no more than 15 feet, but it held something heavier than space. "Ma'am, comply with instructions," Reeves called out, his tone controlled but edged with impatience, as if the scene needed to resolve quickly to justify its existence. Naomi raised her hands slowly, palms open, not in surrender but in clarity, her fingers steady, her shoulders relaxed. The porch light framed her in soft gold, a stark contrast to the flashing chaos beyond it, making her look almost still, almost untouched by the urgency surrounding her. Somewhere behind the line of officers, a car door shut, a radio clicked, a neighbor whispered. The world continued in fragments, but Naomi remained whole, present, aware. She glanced once over her shoulder, just briefly, at the small kitchen where the kettle had begun to hum louder now, forgotten but persistent, then turned her attention back to the man in front of her. There was no fear in her eyes, only a quiet recognition, like someone who had seen this pattern before, in different forms, under different names. The kind of recognition that doesn't rush, doesn't panic, because it already knows the ending hasn't been written yet. And somewhere beneath the weight of flashing lights and raised voices, Naomi Carter understood something simple and unshakable. This moment didn't belong to them, no matter how loudly they claimed it. The night air settled around Naomi like a thin layer of glass, clear but fragile, holding everything in place without truly touching her as the faint hum of the kettle inside grew sharper, almost insistent, a quiet reminder that only moments ago her world had been small and ordinary, defined by simple routines and measured time, not flashing lights and amplified voices. She took one step forward onto the wooden porch. The boards cool beneath her feet, each movement unhurried, as though she refused to let their urgency dictate her pace. And in that refusal, there was something steady, something rooted far deeper than the scene unfolding around her, something the officers could not name, but instinctively resisted. Officer Reeves watched her closely, his grip firm, his posture unchanged, yet there was a subtle shift in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation he quickly buried beneath protocol, because nothing about the woman standing before him matched the tension they had brought with them. Nothing justified the scale of response. And yet the order had been clear, the address precise, the directive unmistakable, and men like him were not trained to question the clarity of commands, only to execute them. Naomi lowered her gaze briefly, not in submission but in thought, her mind moving quietly through details, through connections that existed far beyond the narrow frame of this street, as if she were tracing invisible lines only she could see, lines that stretched past the officers, past the vehicles, past the neighborhood itself. A breeze moved through the trees, soft leaves brushing together in a low whisper that almost drowned out the static chatter of police radios. And for a moment, the contrast felt almost surreal, nature continuing without concern while human certainty pressed forward, rigid and loud. She inhaled slowly, the scent of warm tea still lingering behind her, grounding her in something familiar, something real. And when she exhaled, her shoulders remained relaxed, her posture unchanged, as though she had already accepted something the others had not yet realized. Step down from the porch, Reeves instructed again, his voice measured, attempting control, but Naomi did not respond immediately, not out of defiance, but because she was listening to something deeper than the command itself, something beneath the tone, beneath the authority, something that told her this moment was built on an error that had not yet surfaced. Her eyes moved across the line of officers, not searching for weakness, not seeking escape, but observing, reading, understanding the pattern of their presence, the uniformity of their stance, the way certainty had settled over them like armor, and how fragile that armor would become the moment doubt entered it. She took another step forward, stopping at the edge of the porch, her hands still raised, fingers steady, her expression calm. And in that stillness there was a quiet strength that did not announce itself, did not demand recognition, but existed undeniably behind Reeves. One of the younger officers shifted his weight, glancing briefly toward a superior, as if seeking reassurance, as if sensing the imbalance between what they expected and what stood before them. And that small movement, barely noticeable, was the first crack in the uniform certainty that had brought them here. Naomi noticed it, not with satisfaction, not with judgment, but with quiet acknowledgement, because she had seen this before, in rooms far more controlled than this. In situations where perception and reality did not align, where the smallest inconsistency could unravel something much larger. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft, almost lost beneath the distant hum of engines, yet it carried with it a weight that did not need volume. "You are looking for something that is not here," she said, each word steady, deliberate, not defensive, not pleading, but certain, and for a brief second, the space between her and the officers felt suspended, as if the night itself paused to listen. And though no one lowered their stance, no one stepped back, something subtle shifted, something unseen but undeniable, the beginning of doubt forming quietly beneath the surface of unquestioned authority. Officer Reeves held his position, but something in the air had changed in a way he could not explain, like a sound just beyond hearing that still made the body tense. And as Naomi's words settled into the silence, they did not echo or fade. They simply remained, quiet and persistent, refusing to be dismissed. He glanced briefly at the tablet in his hand, the screen casting a pale glow across his face, displaying the same limited information they had been given: a flagged address, a high-risk classification, no detailed background, no supporting data that matched the scale of response. And for the first time since arriving, the absence of detail began to feel heavier than the presence of orders. Behind him, one of the officers shifted again, this time clearing his throat softly, the kind of small human sound that broke through rehearsed discipline. And though no one spoke, the formation no longer felt as solid as it had moments ago. Naomi remained still at the edge of the porch, her hands slowly lowering to her sides, not because she had been told to, but because the gesture no longer felt necessary, her calm unshaken, her awareness expanding beyond the immediate tension, as if she were already moving ahead of them, anticipating what would unfold before it happened. She studied Reeves with quiet focus, not confrontational, not fearful, simply present. And in that presence there was an unspoken question, not directed at him alone, but at the entire situation. A question about how something so large could be built on something so incomplete. Reeves stepped forward slightly, closing the distance by a few feet, his boots pressing into the trimmed grass, the sound soft but deliberate. And when he spoke again, his voice carried less certainty than before, though he attempted to mask it beneath procedure. "Ma'am, we have a warrant tied to this location," he said, each word measured, careful, as though precision could restore control. Naomi tilted her head just slightly, absorbing the statement, not reacting to the authority in it, but to the structure beneath it, the logic that was supposed to support it but did not quite hold. "A location is not a person," she replied, her voice even, almost reflective, and for a moment, Reeves did not answer, because the distinction, simple as it was, exposed a gap he had not been trained to address. A faint sound came from inside the house, the kettle reaching its peak, a soft click followed by silence, and that small transition, that ordinary shift from motion to stillness, seemed to echo the subtle change happening outside, where urgency was beginning to lose its momentum. One of the patrol car radios crackled louder than before, a dispatch voice cutting through with an update that was too low to fully hear, but enough to draw several heads in its direction, attention fracturing just slightly. And in that fracture, uncertainty found room to grow. Naomi took a slow breath, her eyes lifting briefly toward the dark sky above the streetlights, where the stars were faint but present, unchanged by what was happening below. And when she looked back at Reeves, there was something deeper in her expression now, not warning, not resistance, but recognition, as if she had reached the point where silence was no longer the most effective response. "You are following something that has not been verified," she said, her tone steady, each word placed with care, and though it was not an accusation, it carried weight, the kind that did not demand reaction but invited it, forcing the listener to consider what they had not questioned. Reeves felt it then, not fear, not doubt fully formed, but the beginning of it. The first shift in a foundation he had assumed was solid, and as he glanced once more at the tablet, then back at Naomi, the scene no longer aligned as cleanly as it had when they arrived, the clarity of orders now clouded by the quiet, undeniable possibility that they had stepped into something they did not fully understand. The silence stretched just long enough to feel unnatural, as if the entire street had been placed on hold, waiting for something unseen to catch up with the moment. And Naomi could sense it clearly now, the way tension begins to unravel not with noise, but with hesitation. Officer Reeves shifted his stance again, not stepping back, but no longer leaning forward either, caught in a narrow space between action and reconsideration, his eyes flicking once more to the tablet in his hand before, lowering it slightly, as though its authority had quietly diminished. "Dispatch, confirm warrant details," he said into his radio, his voice still controlled, but carrying a note that had not been there before, a subtle request for clarity rather than blind continuation, and the response came back layered and static, delayed, incomplete, the kind of answer that filled space without resolving it. Naomi watched this exchange without expression, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, as if she had already anticipated this exact fracture in their certainty. And when she spoke again, it was softer than before, but somehow clearer. "You are missing context," she said, not as a challenge, but as a simple truth, and the words settled differently this time, not bouncing off resistance, but slipping into the growing gaps between assumption and fact. Behind Reeves, another officer lowered his gaze briefly, adjusting his grip not out of necessity, but out of uncertainty, the kind that creeps in when a situation begins to feel misaligned. And though no one broke formation, the unity of their stance had shifted into something more fragile, less certain, more human. A car engine idled unevenly somewhere down the line, its rhythm slightly off, and that small imperfection echoed the larger imbalance now spreading through the scene, where what had once felt like controlled authority now felt like something waiting to be corrected. Naomi took one slow step down from the porch onto the walkway, the concrete cool beneath her feet, and the movement, though small, drew every eye again, not because it was sudden, but because it was intentional, and intention, when calm, often carried more weight than urgency ever could. Reeves raised his hand slightly, a reflexive gesture to maintain control, but he did not speak immediately, and that hesitation lingered, visible now, undeniable. Naomi stopped a few feet closer, still maintaining distance, still respecting the space between them. But her presence now felt more grounded, more central to the moment than the line of officers surrounding her. "Who issued the escalation?" she asked, her tone even, direct, not confrontational, but precise, and the question hung there, heavier than any command that had been given so far, because it pointed not to what they were doing, but to why. And that was something Reeves did not have a ready answer for. He glanced again at the tablet, then toward one of the vehicles where a supervisor stood, partially obscured by flashing lights, as if searching for confirmation that had once been assumed. And in that glance, something fundamental shifted, the chain of certainty, beginning to bend under its own weight. The radio crackled again, louder this time, a voice calling for verification, repeating the address, questioning the classification, and though the words were fragmented, their meaning was not. Something had been flagged, something had not aligned, and now the system itself was beginning to ask the same questions Naomi had already answered in silence. She watched the realization begin to take shape across Reeves's face, not dramatic, not immediate, but slow, like light revealing what had always been there. And she did not press further, did not raise her voice, did not demand recognition, because she did not need to. The truth, once introduced, had a way of expanding on its own. A breeze moved through the street again, softer this time, carrying with it the faint scent of cooling tea from inside the house. And for a moment, everything felt almost still, not resolved, not finished, but paused at the edge of something inevitable, where authority no longer led, and understanding had not yet fully taken its place. The radio transmission did not stop this time. It sharpened, rising above the scattered noise of engines and shifting boots, a second voice layering over the first, more urgent, less certain, repeating the address with a tone that no longer matched command but correction, and Officer Reeves felt it settle in his chest, not as panic, but as a tightening awareness that something had moved beyond his control. "Stand by all units." The voice said, clearer now, cutting through the static with precision, "Verification in progress, do not escalate." And the words landed heavily, not because they were loud, but because they contradicted everything that had brought them there. Naomi did not react outwardly, but her stillness deepened, her gaze steady, as if she had been waiting for this exact shift, not hoping for it, not relying on it, but recognizing it the moment it arrived. Reeves lowered his hand fully now, no longer signaling forward movement, and for the first time since the scene began, the line of officers behind him hesitated in unison, their formation holding, but no longer advancing, their certainty replaced by a quiet suspension, as if the ground beneath them had subtly changed without warning. "Dispatch, clarify source of escalation," Reeves said again, this time more direct, less formal, the words shaped by necessity rather than protocol. And there was a pause on the line, longer than before, the kind that carried weight, the kind that suggested someone on the other end was also searching for answers they did not immediately have. Naomi's eyes shifted briefly toward the row of vehicles, then back to Reeves, and when she spoke, her voice carried something different now, not just calm, but clarity shaped by experience. "You were sent here too quickly," she said, each word measured, not accusatory, but factual, and though Reeves did not respond immediately, the statement settled into the silence with undeniable presence. Behind him, one of the senior officers took a step closer, leaning slightly toward Reeves, his voice low but audible. "This is not matching the briefing," he murmured, and, though it was meant to stay contained, the truth in it spread outward, touching others who had already begun to sense the same disconnect. A distant siren faded somewhere beyond the neighborhood, unrelated, yet echoing the tension that now felt less like action and more like waiting. Waiting for something to confirm what was already beginning to feel wrong. Naomi remained where she stood, neither retreating nor advancing, her posture unchanged, her breathing steady, as if she understood that the moment no longer required movement, only patience. The porch behind her stood open, the soft interior lights spilling outward, untouched by the chaos that had gathered, a quiet contrast that made everything outside feel even more unsettled. Reeves glanced once more at the tablet, but this time he did not study it, he simply held it, as though recognizing that whatever authority it had carried was no longer sufficient to justify what was happening. The radio crackled again, sharper now, a new voice cutting in, more authoritative, less local. All units at that location, stand down pending federal review. And the word struck differently, not just a pause, but a shift in control, a signal that, whatever this situation was, it had extended beyond their level, beyond their understanding. Reeves exhaled slowly, the breath measured, controlled, but carrying with it the first real acknowledgement that the certainty he had relied on was no longer intact. And as he looked at Naomi again, truly looked this time, not as a subject, not as a target, but as a person standing at the center of something larger than the orders he had followed, he understood, not fully, not yet, but enough to know, that this moment was no longer his to command. The command to stand down did not arrive with sirens or sudden movement. It arrived quietly, almost too quietly for the scale of what it meant, settling over the scene like a weight that no one could ignore. And for a moment, no one moved, not because they had not heard it, but because they were recalibrating what it meant to no longer be in control. Officer Reeves lowered the radio slowly from his mouth, his fingers lingering against the device as if holding onto the last thread of authority. He still recognized, and when he looked up again, the structure that had defined his role only minutes ago felt distant, replaced by something unfamiliar, something that required listening instead of leading. Naomi remained exactly where she was, her posture unchanged, her presence grounded in a stillness that now felt larger than the officers around her, as if the moment had shifted to center on her without her needing to move at all. A light breeze passed through the street, softer now, carrying the faint rustle of leaves and the distant hum of a city that had continued without interruption, reminding everyone present that the world beyond this moment had never stopped. Even when their focus had narrowed to a single address, a single assumption, one by one, small adjustments began to ripple through the line of officers, a lowered stance here, a glance exchanged there, subtle signs that the certainty which had held them rigid was dissolving into something more tentative, more aware. Reeves took a measured step back, not in retreat, but in acknowledgement, his boots pressing lightly into the grass, the movement controlled, deliberate, signaling a shift without announcing it. And though no words followed immediately, the gesture itself carried meaning that the others understood, even if they could not yet articulate it. Naomi's eyes softened slightly, not with relief, but with recognition, as if she had reached a point she had already anticipated, a quiet turning where tension gave way to understanding, not fully formed, but inevitable. The porch light behind her continued to glow steadily, casting a warm outline against her silhouette, untouched by the flashing lights that now felt less dominant, less urgent, as if their intensity had lost its purpose. Reeves finally spoke again, his voice lower than before, no longer amplified, no longer projecting control, but grounded, human. "Ma'am, we are being instructed to pause," he said, and though the words were simple, they carried a shift in tone that had not existed when he first arrived. A recognition that the situation was no longer defined by his command. Naomi inclined her head slightly, acknowledging the statement without responding to its authority, because authority was no longer the language being spoken here, clarity was. The radio crackled once more, a new voice entering, calm but unmistakably firm, requesting confirmation of compliance, asking for status, and this time, Reeves answered without hesitation. "Units are holding position," he said, each word steady. Grounded in a reality that had changed without warning, the neighborhood remained quiet. But the quiet was different now, no longer tense, no longer expectant, but reflective, as if the moment itself had slowed to allow understanding to catch up with action. Naomi took a slow breath, her shoulders rising and falling gently, the rhythm natural, unforced, and in that simple motion, there was something deeply human that contrasted everything that had come before it, something that reminded those watching, even silently from behind drawn curtains, that this was not just a situation to resolve, but a truth to recognize. Reeves looked at her again, not searching for threat, not evaluating compliance, but observing, truly observing. And in that shift, something fundamental changed, the beginning of awareness replacing the certainty that had once guided him. And though the scene had not yet resolved, though answers had not yet fully arrived, one thing had become clear in a way that could no longer be ignored. This moment had never belonged to force. It belonged to something quieter, something stronger, something that had been standing calmly on a small porch long before the lights ever appeared. The next voice that came through the radio did not belong to local dispatch, and everyone heard the difference immediately. It was steadier, quieter, carrying a level of authority that did not need to raise its volume to be obeyed. And as it cut through the static, the entire line of officers seemed to lean into it without moving, as if instinct alone recognized the shift. "Identify the on-site commanding officer," the voice said, each word precise, unhurried, leaving no room for misinterpretation. And Reeves straightened slightly, not out of habit, but out of something deeper, something closer to instinct. "This is Officer Daniel Reeves," he responded, his tone controlled, but no longer leading, now answering. There was a brief pause, not empty, but measured, as if someone on the other end was confirming something far beyond the scope of the street they stood on. And when the voice returned, it carried a clarity that settled over the scene like final alignment. "Officer Reeves, you are currently engaged at a protected location under federal jurisdiction," it said, calm and absolute. And the words did not echo. They anchored, reshaping the entire situation in a single sentence. Reeves did not respond immediately, because the meaning arrived before the words could, shifting everything he thought he understood into something incomplete. And he felt it fully now, not just doubt, but realization, the kind that does not argue, only settles. Naomi watched him, her expression unchanged, but her stillness now carried confirmation rather than anticipation, as if the truth had finally stepped forward on its own, without her needing to guide it any further. Behind Reeves, several officers exchanged glances, subtle but unmistakable, their earlier certainty now replaced by something closer to awareness, the kind that comes when structure gives way to context. The voice continued, "Stand down all units immediately and clear the perimeter." And this time there was no hesitation in how it was received, because the command did not compete with their authority, it replaced it. Reeves lowered his radio slowly, his grip loosening as the weight of the situation settled fully into place. And for a moment, he simply stood there, looking at Naomi, not as a subject of interest, not as a person to assess, but as someone he had misread entirely. The flashing lights still pulsed around them, but they no longer dominated the scene, their urgency drained, reduced to background noise in the presence of something far more definitive. Naomi took a small breath, her shoulders rising and falling gently, her gaze steady, and when she spoke, it was not to assert control, not to claim victory, but to acknowledge what had already become clear. "You were not given the full picture," she said softly, and the words landed without resistance, because there was nothing left to defend. Reeves nodded once, a small, controlled motion, but one that carried more weight than any command he had given that night, an acknowledgement not just of error, but of perspective, of how easily certainty can form without truth to support it. The radio crackled again, quieter now, confirming compliance, requesting status updates, but the tension that had once driven every movement was gone, replaced by a quiet recalibration as officers began to shift, to lower, to step back in ways that felt less like retreat and more like correction. Naomi remained where she was, not moving forward, not stepping away, her presence steady, unchanged, as if the entire moment had simply unfolded around her, revealing what had always been there. And in that stillness, in the soft glow of the porch light and the fading intensity of flashing lights, the truth stood clear, not announced, not forced, but undeniable. This had never been about power, it had been about understanding, and understanding had finally arrived. The shift did not happen all at once. It moved through the scene quietly, like a tide pulling back after reaching too far, and one by one the officers began to step away from their positions, not abruptly, not chaotically, but with a controlled restraint that mirrored the discipline they had arrived with, only now redirected, recalibrated. Doors of patrol cars opened and closed with softer intent, radios lowered instead of raised, the sharp edge of urgency replaced by something more deliberate. More aware, and Officer Reeves remained where he stood for a moment. Longer, watching it unfold, feeling the weight of the correction settle into his posture, into his breath, into the silence he no longer tried to fill. Naomi did not move toward him. She did not step back either. She simply remained present, her calm unbroken, her gaze steady. And in that steadiness there was no accusation, no demand, only clarity, the kind that does not need to be spoken twice. Reeves took a slow step forward, closing the distance just enough to speak without projection, his voice no longer amplified, no longer carrying authority, but something far more difficult, honesty. "Ma'am," he began, the word careful, respectful, no longer procedural, and he paused, not searching for the right phrasing, but acknowledging the moment itself. "This should not have happened," he said, and the sentence, simple as it was, carried the weight of everything that had just unfolded. Not an excuse, not a justification, but an admission. Naomi listened without interrupting, her expression unchanged, but her eyes softened slightly, not in forgiveness given, but in understanding recognized, and when she responded, her voice remained as steady as it had been from the beginning. "It happened because no one asked the right questions soon enough," she said, her tone even, and the words did not challenge him. They clarified the truth that had already revealed itself. Reeves nodded again, slower this time, absorbing it fully, because he could see it now, how quickly action had replaced inquiry, how easily assumption had filled the space where verification should have stood, and he felt the quiet weight of that realization settle deeper than any command ever had. Behind him, the last of the officers began to withdraw from the perimeter, vehicles shifting position, lights dimming one by one, their presence receding not with noise, but with a kind of respectful distance, as if the space they had occupied was being returned to its rightful state. A neighbor across the street lowered their phone, the glow of the screen fading, the moment no longer something to capture, but something to process, something to understand. Naomi glanced briefly toward her open door, the warm light inside, still steady, unchanged by everything that had taken place outside. And then she looked back at Reeves, not to hold him accountable, not to prolong the moment, but simply to close it with the same composure she had held from the start. Reeves exhaled slowly, the breath measured, and for the first time that night, it did not feel controlled. It felt real, as if something inside him had shifted beyond protocol, beyond training, into awareness. "We will make sure this is reviewed," he said, and though the statement carried an official tone, it was no longer about procedure. It was about recognition, about ensuring that what had happened would not be dismissed or repeated without question. Naomi gave a small nod, acknowledging the intent without attaching herself to it, because her role in this moment had never been to demand change, only to stand in truth long enough for it to be seen. The last patrol car began to roll slowly down the street, its lights no longer flashing, its movement smooth, quiet, and as it passed under the street lamp, the reflections that once scattered across Naomi's home disappeared, leaving the house as it had been before, still, grounded, real. Reeves stepped back then, creating space not out of necessity, but out of respect, and as he did, the distance between them no longer felt like division. It felt like balance restored, a line redrawn not by force, but by understanding. Naomi turned slightly toward her door, not rushing, not lingering, simply moving forward with the same calm intention she had carried from the beginning. And in that movement, there was no triumph, no visible relief, only quiet completion, the kind that does not announce itself, but leaves something lasting behind. The last of the engines faded into the distance, their low hum dissolving into the quiet rhythm of the neighborhood until it became indistinguishable from the distant sounds of the city. And for the first time since the lights had arrived, the street returned to something familiar, something human, where stillness was no longer tension but rest. Naomi stepped fully inside her home, the door closing gently behind her with a soft click that seemed to seal the night on the other side, not as something forgotten, but as something completed. And the warmth of the room met her again, steady and unchanged, as if it had been waiting patiently for her return. The kettle sat silent now, a thin wisp of steam no longer rising, the tea long steeped, its quiet presence a reminder that time had continued even when everything outside had felt suspended. And Naomi moved toward it with the same calm intention she had carried throughout the entire moment. Her bare feet soft against the floor, her breathing even, her shoulders relaxed. Outside, Officer Reeves remained for a few seconds longer than the others, standing near the edge of the walkway where the grass met concrete, his posture no longer defined by command, but by reflection, and he looked at the closed door not as a barrier, but as a boundary he had not understood before, something that had been crossed without question and now restored without resistance. He lowered his gaze briefly, the weight of the evening settling into something quieter, something more lasting than the urgency that had brought him there, and when he finally turned, his steps were slower, more deliberate, as though each one carried a new awareness he had not possessed before. A porch light remained on, casting a steady glow across the front of Naomi's house, no longer interrupted by flashing colors, no longer competing with anything, simply present, constant, and within that light, the space felt grounded again, returned to itself. Inside, Naomi poured the tea into a cup, the liquid moving in a smooth, controlled stream, its warmth rising gently into the air, and she wrapped her hands around it, not for comfort alone, but for connection, for something tangible in a night that had briefly turned abstract. She did not rush to sit, did not turn on a television, did not reach for a phone. Instead, she stood quietly by the counter, her eyes resting on nothing in particular, her mind not replaying the moment, but settling beyond it, as if she understood that what had mattered had already revealed itself, and there was nothing left to prove. Across the street, a curtain shifted slightly, then stilled, the neighbors retreating from their silent observation back into their own lives, carrying with them a version of the night they would not fully understand, but would not forget either. Reeves reached his vehicle, his hand resting briefly on the door handle before opening it, and he paused there for a second, not out of hesitation, but out of recognition, a final glance back toward the house, toward the light, toward the place where certainty had given way to truth, and then he stepped inside, the door closing with a muted sound that marked the end of his presence there. The streetlights hummed softly overhead, their glow steady, unchanging, illuminating a scene that now held no urgency, no command, only quiet. And in that quiet, something remained, something that could not be measured or documented, something that existed in the space between what had happened and what had been understood. Naomi